right. Hi, everyone. Again, Stephanie Lieggi. Make sure I know how this works to get started. This one, right? Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's the wrong. To the right. The other right. Yeah. All right. Great. Thanks. All right. Yeah. Sorry. I'm here to represent three institutions actually. So I'm Stephanie Lieggi. I'm the executive director of the Center for Research in Open Source Software at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Part of our research team also includes my colleagues at UC Berkeley, as well as the Center for Nonproliferation Studies at the Monterey Institute, all in California, all Central Coast. And the focus that we're looking on is, can you hear it? Okay. Okay. I'll get closer and I'll talk louder. Can you hear me now? Is it better? Okay. And I'll try and get a little closer too. So what we were looking at is kind of comparing the historical case study that of security, trade security, to a lot of the discussions that we were seeing with regards to open source software supply chain security. And part of the reason for that is has to do with my background and my previous work at my partner institution in this project at the Center for Nonproliferation Studies. I think, though, for this project, we had a really great team of this very diverse interdisciplinary group. We have software engineers and developers. We have open source specialists, as well as folks who are looking specifically at nonproliferation and trade security, which is its whole kind of subset, niche part of nonproliferation. Now, the genesis of this project really came from this kind of weird place I sit, which is I used to work on nonproliferation issues. Now I'm in open source. And when I was listening to discussions, particularly around the CRA and after XZ happened, that reminded me so much of the discussions around the concerns about cargo security and trade security right after 2001. And so because it reminded me of those conversations, I thought, well, this may be a really good opportunity to do kind of a systematic comparison, recognizing all the caveats of the difference of the two domains, digital versus tangible goods. But this might be a really good opportunity, and I had a really great team of people who are also interested in it. So again, for some background, I worked at the Center for Nonproliferation Studies before and was focused specifically on trade security and trade controls, which a lot of people just say export controls, but there's a wider range of controls involved there. So this, by the way, yesterday's conversation, we brought up export controls. I felt like my worlds had just collided. So I was like, oh, everybody, well, let's talk about export controls. I can get back on my geek hat when it comes to all those fun things. Maybe that's my next research project, I decided. But I thought it was really, like I said, valuable to have this comparison. So I brought together my colleagues who are all really, really, I think, well suited for this. And I just want to share with you where we are today. So this is ongoing research. We are at the interview stage. We started, what I'm presenting now is mainly related to basically an intensive lit review and analysis of the literature, both from the historical case study as well as what the current current landscape for open source supply chain security. And I really want to give a shout out, of course, to our funders. DIAF is a funder for a number of the papers and research being presented today, and it's been a great source of, I think, really interesting funding support for, or very interesting support for, I think, support for interesting research projects coming out, especially the last couple years, cohorts have been really great. So again, we are still working on interviews really to kind of validate some of the lit review and the analysis we've had so far. And so I'm hoping for the final paper, we'll have a little bit more concrete next steps and framework to talk about. But for now, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this because we've talked about it a lot already over the last day and a half. But I do want to focus on how we kind of looked at what open source supply chain security landscape in general, and using these three particular instances of security issues that came up in the last 5 or so years. Mainly because looking at these showed us that there were like different vectors that had to be dealt with to really create a framework that worked for software in general, but also and for open source. And that these three in particular, SolarWinds, as we know, is basically like, a group that was inserting malicious code, and it was very much a Trojanized, Trojanized kind of the updates that were then distributed to a number of users. You have the Log4j vulnerability, which was not really deliberate, but really caused a lot of negative repercussions that are probably still a problem for some users. And of course, the most recent XZ, or the most recent we know about, XZ utils backdoor, which was actually a really malicious attack. There was social engineering involved that created a lot of disconcerting issues for the software community. And I think just in general, from a security folks started, I don't think me, but me in my former life, really started looking at this as like, wow, the impact of this on overall security, not just open source security, had a lot of impact. And of course, according to the EU Agency for Cybersecurity, supply chain security attacks are only expected to go up. I think this quadrupled was what the stat we saw. So keeping that in mind and noting these three incidents, we really looked at trying to figure out how to create a comprehensive security strategy that addressed all these different vectors that we had to deal with. Now, keeping in mind that there definitely isn't, it's not like the open source communities and cybersecurity communities aren't doing anything yet. They are definitely concerned and showing activities that are aimed specifically to deal with these incidents that are coming up. So we have the existing tools and frameworks, the vulnerabilities, databases, static analyzers, and also the software bill of materials, which of course is getting a lot of attention these days, as well as security standards like the software component verification standards and SALSA, just to name two kind of primary ones. But there's significant challenges that we were seeing. A lot of it had to do with limited adoption across the different ecosystems. Because many organizations, as we all know, especially many projects, just maybe don't have the right incentives to do this. It's a lot of work. It's not clear to them whether they have the expertise or resources to actually do it. So we have a kind of it's not a very it's not a consistent level of implementation for a lot of this. And then there's also concerns about lack of integration. A lot of these tools are not integrating well for the projects. Now, of course, regulators also are not sitting on their laurels or taking action. Maybe not action that open source projects and communities think are being very productive. I think the reaction to the original CRA draft is a good indication of what happens when policymakers don't bring in stakeholders and communities that are involved with discussions. And I think that, and again, that kind of backlash really reminded me of what I saw back when we were looking at the historical case study that I will start talking about now. Now, I'm guessing a lot of you in this room are not necessarily have ever really thought through container security and trade security. So I will give a little bit more detail on this, but keeping in mind the time, I'll try not to get in too much in the weeds. You can ask more at the Q&A. But right after 9/11, there was definitely a real pickup in the amount of attention going into trade security, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that it was suddenly something that people realized, oh, there are these vulnerabilities and that we were not thinking about before as being serious, or maybe the people were thinking it's serious, but it didn't come to the level until there was what was seen as something that could have a global impact. And specifically right after 9/11, it was actually a global reaction to this. It wasn't just, it was very US led, but it was not US centric per se. Sorry, I'm losing my notes here. So right after right after September 2001, there was a push within the U.S. government to begin with for what's called 100% cargo screening, which, similar to the way the CRA kind of came out and everybody in open source community went, oh no, this is maybe too far. In that moment, the trade security folks, or the trade industry, the supply chain, those dealing with supply chain for tangible goods, had a very similar reaction. You can't do that. That's going to make all the things you're trying to prevent, it's even worse than anything that you could come up with if you actually wanted to stop every piece of cargo coming into the U.S. It was just not practical. And clearly, nobody talked to industry before they came up with this plan. So that kind of people slowed down and took a breath and said, okay, well, what's going to work? Let's work together. And what came out with a number of key initiatives, and we focus a lot of attention on what C-TPAT, which is the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism, as one of the models we're looking at, like how to broaden that and how to have lessons learned, because that one is particularly something that was seen as very, very successful. I mean, and this part of what we're validating now is that how successful has it been? We're 20 years on, 25 years on almost. Is it still a valid program that people actually see as being successful? And generally, I would say yes. We have now, and because it moved from C-TPAT, which is a U.S.-based one, to the AEO, which are the, sorry, I didn't write out the acronyms on this, I realized. The Authorized Economic Operators, which is basically that same U.S. program, but on a wider stage, so globally. So different countries having their own kind of flavor of that original U.S. program. So that program is still, the AEO is still is now in over 90 countries. So 2 decades later, it's still pretty active initiative, and includes Brazil. Brazil started an AEO program in 2015, and it has about 500 companies certified. And what these programs do is basically say the companies, the traders, so the companies who are trying to import items into the country, be it the U.S. or Brazil, have to do their own security check. So they check for their own vulnerabilities. They verify that they've checked their supply chain, and they made sure their supply chain is as secure as possible. Basically, doing a certain level of due diligence to make sure that there will not be problems with their supply chains, and items could be like snuck in. And then they get certified, and it's completely 100% voluntary. Nobody has to do this, but what they get is it's incentivized program versus a punitive program. And I think I didn't mention that in my earlier slide, that one of the main focuses of what happened and why a lot of this was seen as successful was because of that change, that instead of being a punitive program where, oh, you have to do this and everybody does it begrudgingly, it was more like, oh, you voluntarily can do this, and if you do it, then you get these benefits, easier access to U.S. ports or other ports around the world, and just there was this incentivizing the reasons and making security actually part of a business plan and a positive thing, as opposed to seeing as some sort of friction point. I won't go into, because I know we're running a little low on time. The CSI I'll talk about in a second when that's actually a container security initiative, which is pre-screening outside of the ports, in the port of origin, so outside of the country involved. And so the idea was that instead of having the things scanned or reviewed prior to them even leaving the port of origin, so pushing that out further, and then the SAFE framework kind of like connects all of these together, and that's a World Customs Organization framework that was put into place. And sorry, I'm rushing through these. I realize I don't want to go too long. Right, there, thank you. So again, generally speaking, these programs were seen as successful by the supply chain security industry and industries that are involved in imports. Part of it was because there was a shared urgency. Everybody felt we needed to figure out how to do this and do it together. It couldn't just be the government's taking all the, it wasn't going to be successful. It was just the government pushing it along. Industry and other parts of civil society needed to be part of this. The incentivization, so incentives versus punitive action, were seen as an important part. And alignment with operations, I think, was also a huge thing. It wasn't something that was taken outside of, I think it was done on top. It was not put something, an additional thing put on top. It was something that could be integrated into normal operations. And then I do want to say that continuous auditing, it wasn't just a, oh, you got it done once and that was it. It's a continually renewing. I do want to throw, I know I'm low on time, so I will just this slide, I just want to highlight that yes, we do know that tangible goods are different. I think that than software. I can talk a little bit about the difference of the SBOMs in particular, the idea that not all lists are the same. So an SBOM is not the same as a bill of material that you would have for a tangible good. We do not have, software is dynamic, things change. And there's no single point of origin, so that makes a difference. And of course, software is coming from, especially open source software is coming from communities, which have a huge, which create a different dynamic than industry, like a company that's doing this. And yeah, just the idea that transitive dependencies, as well as the fact that software replicates very quickly. It's not the same as putting something in a container in one port and sending it to another. So these are differences that we are dealing with as part of our discussions now. I'm going to actually skip this one because it kind of repeats on this one, which is these are kind of the actionable items that we're looking at. How to incentivize security for software in the similar way that the C-TPAT did. How to push the security upstream in a similar way that the number of the activities within the supply chain security initiatives did. And also international standards. And I think that's the one I want to highlight the most because, it's really, really easy to get countries to work together, right? This is definitely something that we're seeing these days. I say that as a joke, but in this case, we did see a lot of the standardization of all of these programs and the fact that they were mutually recognized was a huge part of why they were successful. And so finding that, being able to do that within this open source supply chain security, the software supply chain security, I think would be critical because you want to reframe security as something that's seen as a competitive advantage and not as friction. Let me see. All right, these are works in progress. I can talk about them a little bit later. And I just want to thank all of my my colleagues who are working on this from Santa Cruz, Berkeley, and from Monterey Institute. And I think that's it. Okay, I think I'm still on time.